Hi, folks. This is John Thacker with CG Cookie, and I'm bringing you a tutorial on drawing a character. And like most characters that I draw, I do start out with a sketch. Um, it helps me to deal with the issues of the design and the proportions and the difficult problems associated with those two things are very challenging, actually, and for me at least it takes up kind of all my brain space to deal with those without having to worry about color or value. So, I've tried a lot of approaches over the years, and this is really what's worked best for me. And I think it's still good to try and branch out and try other things, but in my case, I find that for the way my mind works, and it's different for everybody, but for me, it's really the approach that gives me the results, at least in the direction that I'm hoping to find. And part of drawing, I think, is working in a way that is conducive to you wanting to do more. And if you're constantly frustrated because you feel like a failure because you saw your hero do it one way and you struggle to do it that way, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you do need to find the approach that works good for you. So as you can see, as I'm sketching this guy out, I'm occasionally use the lasso tool, and I'll grab a part and I'll scale it or move it a little bit. And that's one of the beauties of working with digital, is that you have all these opportunities to edit at your disposal. And I think sometimes that the temptation of doing that is sometimes a hindrance, but with discipline, to remember, like, you need to stick to the fundamentals. I think those things are really powerful assets and should be utilized. I mean, that is, a strength of digital, and don't let it say that, oh, you're weak because you didn't get that line right on the first try. Like, it's really about utilizing everything at your disposal. So as you can see, I'm just kind of refining and testing, and you'll see me undo a lot of times. I put undo as one of the hotkeys on my tablet. It's right there under my thumb because I use it all the time, and that takes the fear out, because I know when I make that wrong line where I just try and be bold and say, I'm going to try this shape, and it's wrong, I can just tap that key and it's gone. And I think that's really helped me with all of my draftsmanship, including with real pencil and paper, because I don't, I'm so used to not being timid, and that was something I really struggled with when I started drawing, and I think I still sometimes fight with that. But it was really a challenge to, to break away and say I can just draw without fear. And again, like, that's one of the strengths of digital, is that you don't need to be afraid, because you can easily undo it. You can erase it. You're not going to wreck your paper or cause any other issues. So really take advantage of that. So as I was saying, I really like to start out with a line drawing and focus on the issue at hand, which is design and getting proportion and shapes that are strong, and making sure that everything reads well, at least at this stage, before I move on, because I don't want to be distracted. I want to put all my mental energy toward really making each stage the strongest. So at this point, I put in just a gradient fill in the background to give a little bit of tooth to work over. I mean, sometimes I'll just do white. It's a matter of the feeling you want in that final piece, and it's really just a preference. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. In this case, I just wanted to stage this guy kind of by himself for the most part, isolated, just character design. And a common approach I use, as you see me doing right here, is I'll fill everything in 100% solid with just 100% brush and lock that layer. And that gives me a silhouette to work in where I don't have to worry about the edges at the time, because by locking that layer and working inside of it, it makes it really not a problem to keep things confined in that silhouette without having to stop at every edge every time. And it kind of lets you do the tedious part once for a while, is keep those edges clean. And at this point, I just usually work with a soft brush and fill in the forms and try and make it read as three-dimensional as soon as possible, to work, big to small, and fat over lean, as they say in painting, which is a a term that applies to traditional painting, but it's absolutely true in digital, because all of this, it's just fundamentals. It's how your mind is decoding what's going on and interpreting that. And all of the techniques, whether you're using a stylus or a brush, are the same in many respects. But yeah, I try to just make things read on a small scale as strongly as I can. And there's always going to be things that are going to need a little more attention to be stronger looking, but for the most part, I do try as hard as I can. And it's often a struggle for me. I think I've always felt painting was a huge hurdle to overcome, and that's probably just because because painting's very, very hard. And I used to be a line guy, and I would just avoid trying to render things because it was so challenging. But you stick with it and you can do it. If I can do it, I think if you saw where I came from, and I'm sure if you search the internet, you can find some of those problems that I struggled with and still do. But I think I've at least made some progress in the right direction. At this point, I'm trying to breathe a little more life into the colors after getting that basic block in to get it to read decently well. I'll usually toss a soft light layer or some other blend mode layer on top and just soft brush in some other hues to break up the monotony of that color, because I think, to me, that's one of the things that really can make a painting fall flat, is just that lack of variation within the color, and having cools and warms play off each other, which is, a really basic concept, but it's easy to forget. And that's really the thing, is basic concepts are really what all of this comes down to. None of this stuff is actually even really complicated at all to understand. It's about mastering the basics and remembering that that's what makes it work. It's really nothing more than that. It's very straightforward, but you need to understand every step of it and how it works with the other steps. And that's the challenging part. But actually doing any one step well is not too hard. It's doing them all together, I think, at least in my mind, it provides a real challenge. White, just to say, this guy's got this white beard and he's got his white furry coat, and I mean, he's a warrior riding a pig, by the way, if you haven't figured that out. But white is an interesting thing to work with too, because we need to remember that all colors play off each other and bounce off each other, and white is highly reflective of its environment around it, and it's going to soak up a lot of that color. And so it can be a challenging thing to render, and I think I fought with it a little bit at times, and like I said, I don't know if I'm ever really how successful I really am. I'm always a harsh critic to myself, but it is something that's interesting about color, and it took me years to even grasp the idea that colors really, they aren't what we think they are. Our minds are tempted to categorize things because we like things to appear simple and feel simple because it's less intimidating. But just we say, blue is blue, but then you color sample it on this image, for instance, and you'll say, it's actually green, or it looks almost gray when isolated by itself. And that's just one of the tricky things about color that I don't think you can really teach anybody. It's just a principle you need to be aware of. And when you're aware of it, you start looking for it, and you learn by doing, and then you understand for yourself. And that's the really tricky thing about it, is just that you need to do it. You just need to do it, and you need to fail, and then question why you failed, and then keep trying. And that is the key to success. And sometimes that's a little disappointing to hear, but the truth is, if it was really easy, everybody would do it. And it wouldn't be so cool to be able to draw or paint if everyone could do it. So at this point, really, it's gotten to, I've worked from the big forums and I'm working to smaller, and sometimes I'll jump around. I mean, it's not about following the rules 100%. And in the case of a character which has a face, I can't resist. I got to spend some time rendering that face to give him a little more connection, so I have a little more connection with it, and I feel a little more invested, and it makes me more excited to finish the rest. Rendering out like his torso or his leg isn't very exciting necessarily, but if I know it's counting toward a great illustration that's compelling, because he has some interest to him, some character. He's a character design, so he should have character. I hope, I try to do that. And I just will sometimes put a little extra effort into the facial area, because that is, where we're going to look first. And that's another thing is about read order in an illustration or in a design. And generally where the contrast is high is where our eyes are going to look first. And you want to remember to play that with our other natural instincts of where we look first. So on a person, we probably are going to look in their face and at their eyes first, and leverage that knowledge to put the contrast and maybe a little tad bit of extra detail where you want it, and minimize the contrast and even minimize the detail or the hardness of edges in other areas. So you want to lead the eye. And with a design that's isolated like this, composition isn't necessarily really even going on too much. The character is composed within itself more so than it's composed with other elements on the page, because there aren't any other elements. It's basically, the dot in the middle of the page. It's balanced, but it's also boring. But within itself, this is being targeted as a design, and within itself there is a composition, there is a play of light and dark and contrast and color temperatures and elements within the character that in itself is the composition. And it takes a lot of practice to be aware of that. And again, it's something that I think it's a lifelong challenge and a lifelong struggle, but also a lifelong little victories here and there when you do something better than you did before and you see it, and you just need to train your eye to pick up what that composition is, what that order is that your eyes bounce back and forth through that image. And you'll get it eventually. And another really helpful thing is flip your canvas when you're working on things, because you will see all the unbalanced aspects so quickly when you flip that canvas. And I have that assigned to a button on my tablet also. I use one of the drawing tablets that has hotkey buttons on it, which I can't live without. They're just great. And by assigning the flip function to that, it doesn't give me any excuse to not use it. And I haven't used it a ton on this yet, but I always flip your work. And, it works different for everybody, but for me, that's a critical thing. And it'd be a huge mistake if I wasn't doing that. So I just, figure I'll pass that along, take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to people telling you how to make art, because everybody does it their own way and there isn't necessarily a wrong way. It's about the result you get, and I have a certain approach, and it's not the best for everybody. It's probably not the best for me, but it's what I know right now. And so I put that arrow up there. That's just to point out, hey, the light's coming from here, so I was really going to pump up the shadows to get the dimensionality. So the furry lining on his cape on his shoulder would cast a strong shadow, and just to help pull out where the deep creases are in the forms, and just make it as three-dimensional as I can, and also just give a point of contrast. And remember that within a piece of artwork you make, you don't have to justify everything within completely realistic means. So if you want to have another light source simply for staging, like that's what this is about. It's about staging the figure in a way it's compelling, and you want to use light sources to present that figure in the best way. And you don't have to say, oh, there's a light at this exact height in this exact place. It's just, it needs to be consistent, but it doesn't all have to always make sense. It just has to look right. And I mean, that's kind of one of the, at least in my mind, one of the cornerstones of art, is that it's about presenting something compelling. It doesn't have to be the way it would be in real life. It just has to be convincing within its own world. And we as humans we're familiar with how the world works, but we're also tolerant to those rules being bent a little bit if it's done in a way that is just a good way of doing it, that comes across as believable. And I think that's kind of the word, is believability. versus realism. I don't care if what I make is realistic. I care if it's compelling and if it's believable in its own realm. And again, sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I fail, and sometimes I feel horribly. But that's generally my goal, because that's fun to me. Slavishly trying to Adobe Help pops up when you color pick. Sometimes it's a great feature, which means bug in Photoshop. Anyway, it's really an important part of creating for me, is that it'd be enjoyable, and I want the viewer to feel some of that enjoyment that I have with making something that is interesting and not boring. And that's the goal. Is like, if I make something that's boring, and sometimes, a lot of times, I feel the stuff I make is pretty boring, and I tell myself, next time I've got to make something that's just more exciting and captures your imagination more, because that's just, to me, that's what keeps me going, and that's what makes this such an opportunity to get to do this professionally is a huge deal to me. And it means a lot that I can do something I actually like and enjoy most of the time. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to say. And I just want there to be an element of fun whenever I can. And, different projects require different things, but when I'm working for myself, more and more as time's gone by, I want to make things that are enjoyable and fun. And I want to help people feel the way I felt when I came up with the idea, and pass some of that along. It's really just at this point where I'm just doing a lot of really small refinements, and if it doesn't work on a kind of a gross scale, on a big scale, these little details aren't going to do anything. You're wasting your time. But when you feel like you have a solid form, and you have, that form is carved out and things are reading well, these little details do go a long way to giving it that little bit of polish. You can see that I'll zoom in and out a lot, and that's because I like to check the overall read and see if, for instance, if some of those little highlights are maybe too dominating and they don't balance with the rest of what's going on. And it's hard to explain that. It's something that you do it enough and you get a feeling for it. And another thing you'll notice is when I open my brush picker on my palette, you see I have about approximately 2 million brushes there. Not really, but I have a lot of brushes. And just as a note, I'm only using, I think, 3 brushes for this whole thing. I've gone through the phases that probably everybody either has gone through or will go through, is that you get real excited when you find out about custom brushes that do fancy things, but eventually you figure out that there's a time and place for those, but most of the time you really just need to stick to the fundamentals, because that you just get distracted. At least I know I do. I get distracted a lot by those fancy brushes, and they usually just wind up making work that I paint over with a simpler brush. I mostly use just the regular round brush, and then a regular soft brush, or a soft brush that has a slightly jagged edge to it, which blends nicely. And then I use kind of a squarish brush, and those are my standbys, and I use those a lot. And like I said, there is a time and place for different types of brushes, but I mean, the soul of it really has nothing to do with the tools. It has to do with getting that compelling imagery and thinking about how to stage it and present it in a compelling way. And a lot of times technology can't think for you. It can't make creative decisions. It's just there to get you to, it's a means to an end, right? I'm going back in here and putting in some more color to tint and just get that subtle color shift from the cool to warm side again. So I have the warm light with cool shadows, since you want those to complement each other, generally speaking. And even though it's subtle, which is often, I think, a strong way to go, it's, you don't really notice it at first. And, a lot of people may not notice it at all consciously, but subconsciously, it really goes a long way to making things pop and feel more alive. And it's really a critical detail. And then Also edges, softness of edges helps to push things back a little bit or de-emphasize them. And there's not a lot of that going on with this particular image, but there's a little bit, and you can see at the bottom it's kind of fuzzy and glows. And that softness helps de-emphasize that, because I don't want people to look at the ground and make it super detailed. Like if I did every blade of grass down there, it probably would look really bad. It's not, at least it's not the style that I was going for. I want this to have a kind of rough hewn look, which to me kind of goes with the design and just the feel of this character is like present them in a rough, kind of unfinished look, because he's kind of a rough guy. He's riding his big dirty pig. He shouldn't be razor sharp, at least in the instance I wanted to present it. Just kind of blended it with the background a little bit with a soft brush to kind of soften up the contrast, so it's not too high, because you usually don't want things to have such a shocking contrast that it feels too stark, because it kind of flattens things out a lot of time. Put a color adjustment layer on there, which helps balance things. If it's I'll often look at a color adjustment layer and see if it looks any better, and a lot of times it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and it really, it's no loss to try. Looks like this is about done. I think I'll grab his hand here in a minute and resize that, because I'm looking at it, I'm saying that right there, too small, and his forearm's too long for the foreshortened angle. It looks bad, so move that. Real easy. Great thing about digital, and that pretty much wraps it up. This has been John Thacker with CG Cookie, and it's been great to work with those guys. They've been awesome. They're not prompting me to say that. They've been really cool people to work with, and it's been a real pleasure to have that opportunity. And yeah, thanks for watching.